Whoopi Goldberg, co-host of The View on ABC, has been suspended for 2 weeks after receiving severe backlash for making comments during a live broadcast saying, in part, the Holocaust was not about race. Goldberg issued an apology saying, quote, "On today's show, I said the Holocaust is not about race, but about man's inhumanity to man. I should have said it is about both." She continues, "The Jewish people around the world have always had my support, and that will never waver. I'm sorry for the hurt I caused." And joining me now to discuss this and more is Rabbi Mitchell Rocklin, president of the Jewish Coalition for Religious Liberty. Rabbi Rocklin, welcome. Great to have you on the show. First off, I'd like to get your thoughts on Whoopi Goldberg's comments. When you heard what she said, what went through your mind?
Well, yeah, it was very unfortunate. I actually wasn't certain. Well, was this just something that was said as a mistake that could be easily corrected and apologized for? The initial clarification that came out was actually even more troubling than the initial comment, because it essentially doubled down on it. Unfortunately, there is a tendency to say, well, racism is wrong, but when Jews are the subject of discrimination, well, it isn't really about race. Jews are different than other racial groups. I think we've seen that recently with other anti-Semitic troubling events, and that can come from different ends of the political spectrum, whether it's coming from the right in the case of, or the far right, I should say, in the case of neo-Nazi rallies, or whether it's coming from the far left in the case of Amnesty International's recent report attacking and singling out the state of Israel. So it's unfortunately just another incident that mischaracterizes hatred against Jews and sort of creates an exception for it. She did issue a clearer apology, which was better, but at the same time still troubling, because there's this sort of asterisk. Well, it's about race and it's also about inhumanity, whereas people wouldn't say that about other forms of hatred against racial groups.
Yeah, and how do you think this plays into the bigger discussion of race? And also, do you think those comments that she made, do you think that's maybe about not being educated enough about the Holocaust, or do you think it's something else?
It's common to chalk these sorts of things up to saying, well, the person's not educated enough. But I don't think that's what it is. I trust that she knows quite well what the Holocaust was about. I think there is something else at work, which is there is an effort, unfortunately, that we've seen in recent years, more on the political left, to create a sort of racial hierarchy or a victim hierarchy rung, if you would, where some racial groups are focused on more, and hatred and bigotry that are targeted against their race is sort of prioritized. And then for other groups, and I think we've seen this with Jews in particular, it's not really about race, it's different, when it actually is about race. I think that's highly unfortunate, and I think it's created a double standard in recent years on the political left, where it's acceptable to attack Jews or characterize Jews in ways that would not be acceptable for just about any other racial minority.
Yeah, and we have seen this growing rise in anti-Semitic rhetoric and actions lately. I mean, here in Washington, D.C., a man was charged for spray painting swastikas all over Union Station. And in Central Florida, a number of anti-Semitic rallies were held. And this all happened in just the past week. Let's talk more about that and what's contributing to it.
Yeah, anti-Semitism, as is commonly said, is the world's oldest hatred. It's a very difficult problem to explain. Many scholars and commentators have tried to explain it. But I think that historically, anti-Semitism has always been a sort of scapegoat ideology that no one is really immune from. There's something about the human condition that leads us to try to create the scapegoat of the Jew and what the Jew stands for. We've seen it, again, as I said earlier, from the far right, and we've seen it from the far left. And every era is different. In different eras, in different times, in different places, anti-Semitism tends to come from one corner or another. I think in the United States now, we've thankfully seen that whenever anti-Semitism is coming from the far right, there's a very quick and swift and almost universal reaction to it. Unfortunately, I think there's somewhat of a double standard that we've seen in recent years, where when anti-Semitism is coming from the far left, people are not paying as much attention to it. So it's great that when 20 or so neo-Nazis rally in Florida, there's swift and universal condemnation of it. But what I think we need more of is swift and universal condemnation of things like Amnesty International's report against the State of Israel, for example, or comments that seek to separate Jews from other races and say, well, with them, it's not really about race.
Yeah, well, Rabbi, really quickly, we're about to wrap up here, but any final thoughts before I let you go?
I just think that, I'm optimistic overall. The United States and the American people have a wonderful spirit. But at the same time, I think it's easy to get focused on one sort of hatred while ignoring, another type of hatred. I think we've seen this in Congress. Steve King from Iowa made some pretty anti-Semitic comments. He was roundly condemned on both sides of the aisle. But Ilhan Omar on the Democratic side made comments that were just as egregious and was essentially given a free pass. So I think we need to fix the double standard in this country, and I think Jews will feel a lot more optimistic if we're able to do that.
All right, Rabbi Rocklin, thank you so much for coming on and giving us your analysis. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.